I want to open up this discussion, which is in the air right now on the internet in America, on the streets, with all the protests and the demonstrations, and even the politicians having to come out and take a stance and do their talks about it. So I have some opinions on the facts that I've gathered together. But I also have a plan for America. And if this discussion can get going and produce some results in people's minds, of better understanding and more hope and actual results, in their lives, in their neighborhoods, then I'm going to be able to tell you about these plans so that the plans can be implemented and develop America along futuristic lines. Let's just put it that way, futuristic lines. So for a lot of people that can be scary. They don't want change. So for the people that don't want change, they're not going to be interested in this discussion. Okay? They already just excluded themselves. So that's not anybody's doing but their own. So those of us that come to the table, let's see what's going on here. I just had on the screen an article called "The U.S. is Coming Apart at the Seams." And that really lends itself to the discussion. That's why I used it first. Because, we're looming on a disaster here. Not only with the idea of the racial strife, the internal strife. You see now there's the Daily News of New York, a very kind of sensationalistic part of the media. You got to take it with a grain of salt, but here their article says NYPD cops are warned militant group Black Guerrilla family preparing to shoot on-duty police officers. Okay, well, is that anything new? The cops are basically a gang themselves. They're a legitimized gang. It's mob rules, and they operate under the premises that they are the rule of law. Well, mob rules has the word rules in it. Rules of law. But what does that mean for America? Does it say anywhere in the Constitution or anywhere in the founding principles that, outrightly, like the detailed, specific wording or even the intention of it, stating about color as a factor of your status? It doesn't. It doesn't. In fact, the words white and black or race, they are not in the Constitution. They are not in the Declaration. However, it talks about tyranny. It talks about being a colony. It talks about one people and another. It talks about different nations. It talks about empire. A lot of it is about one government versus another. Okay? It's not racial. In fact, I'm going to give you this one thing. This is where you need to, encapsulate this right here at 4 minutes and 18, 19, 20, 21 seconds. We're talking about the true history of the United States prior to what they call the American Revolution, which was against King George and Britain, rule Britannia. The period before that, for at least 100, 200 years, possibly even longer than that, slavery had included people of any color. In fact, the word slave, we have found out through meticulous research, Slave is actually a variant form, almost exactly the same, as Slav. The Slavics. So Slavs became slaves. Slavs, Slavs, okay? And the reason why that's true, the reason why the fact of the similar sounding word, term, is because these people were taken by other empires and kingdoms of Europe as slaves or indentured servants. It was considered to be very common to take from the Slavic ethnicity, that part of Europe, which is now the Balkans, Balkanization, they're constantly getting abused. I'm not saying constantly, but there's historically that they can be taken as slaves. This was started by the Romans and possibly even earlier. You look at Spartacus, remember that movie? These are the ancestors of Slavs. Okay? Let me just take a break for a second. What I'm saying is that race is not so much a part of it. It's being thought of that way in today's day and age. It's being thought of. And that is another form of it. It's a distortion of really what had always gone on historically. What's more accurate to say is that it's a class war. It's about the haves and the have-nots, and it's about your economic status, whether you're low class, middle class, or high class, upper class. Upper class being the richest. Lower class is simply meaning that you don't have money, you don't own land. So these are the paupers, these are the serfs, these are the indentured servants. Just because you're getting paid $7, $8 an hour, $9 an hour, it doesn't meet any standard of living. That's why minimum wage earners are also now protesting. Did you hear about that? They want at least $15 an hour. Now, just myself, I mean, wow, I would be so comfortable with $15 an hour. I would be comfortable with $12 an hour. But let me just take myself out of this. Let's look at the news stories on Yahoo. So the first one says the chokehold death gets violent in California. The protest against the chokehold death, right? So I think this is Berkeley or Oakland, right in the Bay Area. So Northern California is usually right on the pulse of what's happening in America. Now, we also hear stuff about Israel, we hear stuff about the Vatican, the Pope, and then Venezuela leader. That's interesting. So we got some international opinions on it. The current Venezuelan president, who is Nicolas Maduro, who took over after the demise of Chavez, which was a very suspicious occurrence. We have the opinion that even under Obama, who is multiracial, racism to Venezuela seems to get worse. Racism of the United States is on the rise, is worsening, it's in decline, it's getting out of control. He says, I'm sorry because to some extent I respect Obama personally, but I think he's a hostage of the real powers in the U.S., and he decided not to fight. He's tired and exhausted. Okay. So let's go back to the domestic issue, and there's been some war of words here between de Blasio, the current mayor, and Guliani, a former mayor and also a former failed presidential candidate. I think he has an axe to grind. You have to analyze Guliani based on what de Blasio is saying about him. De Blasio has a lot more weight because he's in the current office. It's almost like, do we really have to hear from Dick Cheney again? So here's Giuliani saying that's a responsibility of the black community, and he says there's no racism. He says, well, look, Giuliani, career-wise, had always been a prosecutor. Prosecutors in most areas of the U.S. are closely linked with the police force. So if there's anything corrupt or tyrannical about the police department by region, then it is going to have a link with whatever philosophy the prosecutor has. So Giuliani has kept this philosophy. However, de Blasio was the one that Giuliani was attacking just because de Blasio described his family relationship, that he has a mixed racial marriage and family, because his son, similar to the racial background or ethnic background of Obama. So the son was trained on how to handle encounters with the police. Okay. Now, this is completely valid. This is completely acceptable. And why Giuliani has to fly off the handle, he's got a lot of nerve. What I want to suggest is, like, somebody should investigate Giuliani's background very carefully. Now, what are we talking about the Civil War here? Because I just want to admit that I'm surprised that things have gotten so racial, so racist-based, racism-based. Right? That's really the way to put it. I was wondering what the dividing lines would be for when the country is approaching civil war. And farther down the list was about race. I thought it was going to be something else. As I said, I think something more accurate to say is class warfare. How would you analyze the police in that case? Well, the police are protecting the moneyed interests. They don't care about the poor compared to that. If they have to make a choice, I mean, who do you think they're going to defend? They're there to defend everybody. However, though, there's an ideology that goes along with their training. So the training says, let's be clear about this. Protect yourself first. That's why there's laws in place that say a police officer being killed has more impact and more rights than anybody else. And that you can get the death penalty if you kill a police officer. However, if you kill anyone else, you might do a year or two. If you killed your neighbor and they were, everybody was black, you might do a few years. But if you kill a cop while he's on duty, because, there's his uniform, he's like put on his costume, Batman. So this shows you the disparity, the inequality, the unfairness, the injustice, the distorted perception of things. And for them to come out, or for anybody to come out and say, you cannot resist arrest. What do you mean resist arrest? Like, say something? I want to make people capable and trained, effective within police encounters. And that means police also. Because you can get yourself in trouble with that attitude. People are not going to take excessive intimidation. And that's what this is about. Now, we know this is a class warfare. We know that it is. It's not about race. We know that the rich are really pushing for all this. And next video I'm going to have to do about Mexicans. Because this is what's happening mostly on the federal front. And it's all the Latinos are going to have to answer for this. They're going to have to